Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue, episode number 515. My name is Minter Dial and I'm your host for this podcast, a proud member of the Evergreen Podcast Network. For more information or to check out other shows on the network, please go ahead and visit evergreenpodcast.com. So this week's interview is with Thom Dennis. Thom is the CEO of Serenity in Leadership. A former Marine, he's also a facilitator, speaker, consultant, educator, and change agent. In this conversation with Thom, we discuss his experience as an officer in the Royal Marines, his work on creating culture change in business, crafting an organization's purpose, and the necessary qualities for successful leaders today. You'll find all the show notes on minterdial.com. And if you have a moment, go ahead and drop in a rating and review. And certainly don't forget to subscribe to catch all the future episodes. Now for the show. Thom Dennis, lovely to have you on my show. I met you through our mutual friend, Anita Novak. And I got interested in what your profile is. And in fact, one of the podcasting services says, you must interview this chap, Thom Dennis. And I go, I know him. Let's do it. So you are the CEO of Serenity in Leadership. You're also an ex-Marine. And I would love for you, in your own words, Thom, to describe who is Thom Dennis.
So I'm a guy with a lot of passion. I suppose that whatever I've done in my life, I've applied that passion, not necessarily usefully, not necessarily productively, but with passion. So I want to bring about some positive change in the world, and I've done that in whatever job I've done. I've tried to bring that about. When I worked in the MOD many moons ago, I think I was the first with an optical character reader, because I could see that all these secretaries just typing out huge manuals. There were better ways to do it. I was one of the first to have one of those huge brick telephones, and indeed a PC. I had this amazing luggable Toshiba. So yeah. One analogy I quite like is skiing in virgin snow.
Nice.
So I've not often chosen easy routes for myself, and now I really want to bring about some changes in the way that organizations are run, and make organizations safer for people to work in. And I'm not talking about health and safety there. I'm talking about people actually, particularly women, but also other, what one had, I think there's this misnomer of minority groups. I don't like it. It's a sort of separating term, but I love Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, his latest book. And I think, although I go in a slightly different direction with a lot of, I'm not disagreeing with anything he says, but I take that title slightly differently. There is a myth of normal, and it's the majority that creates the definition of normal. And that's all wrong. That's all wrong, because it is immediately and by definition exclusive. So I want to help people be themselves and not feel excluded.
I want to go back to the first word you employed that struck for me was passion. Where do you think that passion comes from? Is it something that people have innately or must develop or can develop?
Well, I think that I think you're familiar with the concept of constellations, family and organizational constellations.
Yes.
And I think that takes me to the thinking that, there's people talk about nature and nurture, but I think there's a third piece in there, which is what we bring from our systems, our family systems. And so where does my passion come from? I think a lot of this is actually systemic. And I've never actually constellated it. But if I think of
Mm.
my upbringing, I'm not sure that there are places there where I can see a generation of passion. When I was at boarding school, I had a need to stand out, which actually was incredibly painful. But I had that need, and it led me into all sorts of difficult situations. But you know, if there's a root of passion in there, it was already flowering, in a sense. So I don't know is the short answer
Mm.
to your question.
Mm. And this notion of the need to stand out, and then you talk about, I didn't always take the easy path. Do you regret that?
Well, it's made me who I am, and I don't regret that. I've had a life of ups and downs. I guess like everybody. And some of the downs have been extremely painful, and some of the ups have been amazing. I wouldn't want to have a kind of flat line life. Um, but I think like most people um, with passion, their life experiences take them to a place where they are armed through their bruises and their wounds to do things when they're older. And so, yes, that those I wouldn't be who I am, and I wouldn't have the ideas and the thoughts and the wish to change certain things if I hadn't had that bumpy life.
Mm. Well, I excerpted out of that a line you meant or you said, which is the flat line life. I mean, a flat line? That doesn't sound like much living, does it? If you're a doctor, anyway. And I feel like when you talk about this notion of safety, I wonder where you position us in a world where if we have too much safety, we'll have no bumps.
That's right. And I think we are in danger of certainly from a health point of view, bringing up generations of children who are not armed to handle some of the things that nature will throw at them. You know, I remember as a kid, and I remember actually when I was in France once, there was a son of a cousin of mine, and we found him picking off snails off the vines and stuffing them in his mouth. And they were very small snails, and he had hundreds in his mouth.
Des escargots.
Yes, but it's like that's healthy dirt. But we live in a world where there's so much cleaning that I think we disarm ourselves and our children. So in the same way, I think going through life and avoiding any experience that tests one or stretches one, um, you know, I suppose another analogy is going to the gym when you operate your muscles, when you push them, they get stronger. So, you know, and I think actually the pandemic, one of the greatest harms of the pandemic was that lack of exercise, both literally and also I think for many people, uh, um, emotionally, perhaps, and mentally.
Well, at least socially, because we're all isolated.
Yes, and we were taken into difficult places. A lot of us. It was a
So,
very uneven experience socially.
of course, I want to. There's a bunch of things I want to get into, but I just want to start with a your LinkedIn profile has horses in the background. Why horses?
Well, that was part of my adventure. in 2009, I went to the States. Um, Actually, because, well, what I was seeking was wilderness. I wanted to really experience what wilderness was like, and there isn't very much in this country. Um,
Well,
and
the plains of
uh,
Wyoming don't exist in Shropshire.
Yes, well, the Four Corners when you go to New Mexico and Arizona, around there, and the Grand Canyon. These places are amazing. Um, so why horses? Well, this was all to do with constellations, and I used to constellate in organizations to a degree, not sort of full time, but I went to a I don't know, a week-long workshop on constellations in Holland, and I saw one person constellating using a horse rather than a group of people, and it was amazing. And so when somebody asked me in one of my large clients in Houston, they said, "We want something different on our offsite when we're bringing people from all over the world together." And I said, "I know the very thing," and I looked for a horse person in Houston. I was sure there was going to be one, and I
Well,
found
sure.
one.
They have a great
And
polo. They have great polo in Houston.
yeah, these are horses. These are working horses, working in the sense of helping veterans, helping autistic children. Um, and I went to this therapist and her horsewoman and said, can we work organizationally?" And they said, "Well, I guess so." And so I took my constellation knowledge, and actually what I found very quickly was that the horsewoman was constellating. She just hadn't linked the Hellinger work with what she was doing, which was amazing because young women in a residential facility who were there because of behavioral problems, largely related to drink and drugs and addiction. And the horses were working miracles with these girls. And as one of the girls said, I've worked with therapists all my life, but it's the horse that makes a difference to me. And so seeing the horses relating to these people in truly amazing, gobsmacking ways led me to actually form a relationship with the horsewoman. And we ended up with a herd of 14 horses living on a ranch. So the horses played a very, very large part in my life. And that picture was of me sitting there with, I think, about 8. You can't quite see them all, but there was about 8 horses who just had surrounded me and were being with me. I mean, if ever one was said that, we should be more and do less, that was a moment in my life.
Lovely. I have had a lovely friend of mine called Hervé Franceschi. We had on my French podcast, and we talked about the amazing things we can learn from animals. And if we let ourselves get into that animalistic side of ourselves, which we tend to sort of brush off with ties and culture, civilization, and all that. So, beautiful story, Thom. Thank you for sharing. I want to get into the first major piece for me, which is about the Royal Marines. You served as an officer in the Royal Marines for 17 years. That is one bulk of a time. I mean, I would imagine at some point you were thinking, this is my total career for the rest of my life. What did you take away from your experience in the Royal Marines?
I think the Royal Marines attracts quite a wide group of people. I mean, today they are passionately fit. I wasn't particularly fit in those days. I mean, I wasn't bad, but I wouldn't get in today with the fitness I had then, because
At the
now,
age.
yeah, I mean, so it attracts different people, and I think what joins them all is a kind of maverick mindset. I remember going through training. I don't know whether I should say this, but we were encouraged to cheat at exams, but on the understanding that if we were caught, we'd be thrown out. And it sort of developed this mindset of what have you got to do if you're working behind enemy lines? And if you look at ex-Marines, they are all over the place in all sorts of organizations. And there's one he was in Afghanistan. He lost both legs and one arm, and he's raising money for charity, running with his prosthetics. And there are examples of determination and resilience, like it's just utterly amazing. And so I don't see myself as a shining example of that. I feel very humble in the presence of some of the people that I've worked with. And interestingly, I'm just creating a new leadership program, and I've come together with an ex Special Forces Royal Marine, who's not long out of the Corps, and his professionalism and his cheerful determination is something that I love to be around, because it reminds me of being in the Corps and seeing all these consummate professionals doing amazing work. So I'm very proud, I suppose, is one thing I take away from that. But there are many people whose footsteps I do not feel worthy to tread in. But I have seen great leadership. And my first commanding officer when I was an adjutant, Andrew Whitehead, I've seen leadership, but that man was just amazing. Amazing. And it's when you have role models like that, it encourages you to be your best.
You've got questions, we've got answers. Business leadership, ownership, and sales can be challenging. Tune into the Accelerate Your Business Growth podcast to learn from the world's experts. Join me, your host, Diane Helbig, as I chat with people who have expertise in various areas of business. You'll enjoy the lively conversations that are focused on providing you with the ideas, tips, and suggestions you need to realize greater success. Get what you need for your business when you need it from the people who have the answers. Accelerate Your Business Growth is part of the Evergreen Podcast Network and is available on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
So two comments and a question. The first is I was noting down as I listened to you about cheating on exams. I was thinking of the term responsible deviance. If that's possible, some sort of paradox in there. And I wanted to cite a chap I've met, I can't call a friend, but I've met him a couple of times, called Giles Dooley. So he's a photographer who lost 2 legs and an arm and decided that, well, that's not enough. I can go back, and goes back and is still a photographer with missing 1 arm and 2 legs. So there are some remarkable people out there that just blow us away and remind us that really, if we put our mind to it, we can overcome so much more. So the question, though, regards as Mr. Whitehead, what was so remarkable about his leadership?
I never heard him bark at anybody. I supported him, as his adjutant, with all disciplinary processes, and he was firm but fair across the board. I wasn't with him in that, but he led one of the commandos in the Falklands. And the stories from some of my good friends who were serving with him there are just amazing. He made amazing decisions. He had extraordinary patience. And was very he had great humility, and I think that's one of the beautiful things about great leaders is, in my view, they have humility. So they don't shout about themselves, and they don't need people to give them great accolades. They are who they are, and that's good enough.
And they don't even need to shout at you. They, as you said, he didn't bark. The words firm but fair are absolutely three words that I write firm and fair, but in my book about leadership, and I think it's a great way to be. So thank you for that. And now I want to get on to one piece of your work at Phoenix Obsidian, where you worked for nearly 29 years, culture changing at various companies. And you mentioned you did 3.5 years at a medium-sized French pharmaceutical company. I was wondering, how does culture change happen differently in a French company versus perhaps an Anglo-Saxon company in your experience? Is there a difference? And then how did you go about making that happen? Because as you know, I worked for a French company, a little larger than medium-sized, cosmetics company, L'Oréal, for 16 years. So I'm deep in the wool in Frenchness.
I think, I mean, okay, this is my view. I think the French university system produces leaders who have particular traits. And unless a French leader has served abroad and been either anglicized or something else sized over and above French, the francophone attitudes, I'm being obtuse here, sorry. I think with the university system, that people are treated very badly, and they're put down a great deal. And I think that's a leadership trait that people take away with them. And it's not very nice. Now, the organization that I went in, I was working in a pharmaceutical, and one of the members in the C-suite there in Paris had dinner with an old schoolmate who, it turns out, had just been put in charge of this medium-sized pharmaceutical. And the new CEO, was saying, I don't know what to do here, because my leadership team is so fixed and stuck in old ways. I don't know how to change them, but I've got to change them. I know that. So at this dinner, the two of them, the one I'd been working with, said, hey, look, talk to Thom Dennis. He may be able to help you, because he's certainly helping us. And so I met this chap, and what he described was all his team had been there for 20 years or more, apart from one who'd been there 10 years. And he was regarded as sort of the new boy. And I think, and I've come across this in a number of organizations, a new leader comes in and says, how am I going to get into this? How can I change them? Because clearly there was an awful lot of change needed. They were, the team were very autocratic, and actually there was sort of 17th century in the way they were running the organization. So I had a colleague, a French colleague, who I loved working with. I mean, I haven't worked with her for a while, but she had devised a system which was sort of rooted in NLP, but also the masks of the Commedia dell'arte. And one of the things that she had found is that when whoever you are, whatever character you are, if you're told the character of a mask and you put the mask on, somehow it allows you to be that character, even if you're completely not that character without the mask on. It's fascinating how just covering your face with we use proper leather masks, but if you've been told what the character that mask is, you take it on. It's very easy. And so what we did was to break down the ice that surrounded them all, and also began to explain to them which mask they naturally wore. And I think we used seven masks. And I mean, cut a long story short, we worked with them and then cascaded the work, not so much using the masks because it was just too complicated, but with as the comité d'action started to open up, it created channels into the rest of the organization that we could work with. And the denouement, the sort of the peak of it all was when we ran an offsite for their salespeople who were brought in from all over the country. These were people who interacted with doctors and sold the drugs. We brought them into a hotel in Cannes for 2 days, and the comité de direction, which had been absolutely distant from everybody else, did a skit. They actually, we created a stage, and they did a skit, and they made absolute fools of themselves in a good way.
Autodérision. Wow.
And I mean, what it did was transform the view of everybody of these people who they'd seen as monsters and extremely unpleasant people, because they were prepared to make a fool of themselves and be okay about it. And that, takes one into a whole conversation about vulnerability and the power of it and all that stuff. But it was transformative. And we used Lego as well during that offsite, and had people building things, and they were just doing things that they'd never done before. Well, I'm not trained in Lego serious play, but I was sufficiently adventurous. I just gave them a bunch of Lego things and got them to make things, and it was great.
Well, it brings out the child, right?
Precisely.
So you were talking about masks, and Thom, and it reminded me, well, it makes me think of, in any event, the idea that we have little stories that we have in our mind, and how we are marked and moved by stories. So when you don a mask, at some level, it's like, this is the little story I have about me. And it shows to what extent and how quickly we will adopt new thoughts and beliefs based on the stories that we tell ourselves.
Yeah, I think they were so surprised at who they appeared to, who they revealed of themselves.
And that's a good thing. Oh, you wrote an article which I enjoyed. It says, we've always worn masks. And then the second subtitle is, well, how COVID-19 has further shaped them. I tend to fully agree with you, of course, that we always have masks. Masks are probably, at some level, absolutely necessary to get through life. For example, you can't be the naked husband going outside to take a bus. You have to be a clothed husband, or, whatever, man, going outside to take the bus. So you are putting on clothes, and clothes are, if nothing else, a mask of sorts, representing, I wear Gucci, you wear Prada, or whatever. And so I'm not afraid to say we must have masks. We must not bring our total private, sometimes naughty selves to work. So that means we are going to distance ourselves. What's your take?
How interesting. We talked at the beginning about, I had a need to stand out, and I one of the ways I did that was to persuade my mother to give me suits which were outlandish. So I was standing out, and people didn't like it. Going back to that thing about the definition of normal, but what we're getting into this is this need to conform in order to be accepted, in order to be able to belong. And I wish we could belong because of who we are, not because we have to dress or wear masks in a certain way. If your example of going naked to the bus stop is a little difficult to follow. I mean, to build on, because it's so extreme in a way. But it's very interesting that since the pandemic, you don't see many people wearing a tie anymore. Men, ties have gone out of fashion in a lot of ways. You look at, it's always struck me that, I was in the military. In the old days, people of a certain class, as they left school or whatever, they went to university, but essentially they joined the clergy, they joined the military, or they went into the law or accountancy. And each of those has its own uniform. And so when I worked in the city a lot, I used to wear the uniform of the city. And so it made me sort of fit in. But there's a maverick side of me that says, the hell with that. I wish actually I'd had the courage to go in not conforming at all. And maybe nobody would have wanted to see me or not. I don't know.
Well, it's certainly a common thread in what I like to talk about, which is this need to belong, have a community, and yet need to stand out even within that community. And there are issues like diversity. So like-minded and diverse. Oh, well, that's kind of oxymoronic, because if we're all the same-minded, well, then we're not really very neurodiverse. So it's a paradox that we must live with. And I find it's the numero uno paradox, which is this need to belong and yet be different. So you want to belong to a group, you wear the uniform, but then within the uniform, you can express yourself differently. But in that path, you must accede to what is the community's situation, their context, their values. Once you sort of pass muster into that, then you should be allowed to, with certain boundaries all the same, be you within that. Or the alternative is you're a misfit and you are told you have to fit in to this code, like you at boarding school, perhaps. And then you didn't really accede to the code of the school at the beginning. Your parents put you in there. You were a misfit. You wanted to come out, and that's the cost. So the challenge is, do you go in accepting the community and then be different, or be different and then try to find a community?
Yes. And I suppose that some people will do either of those, I mean, some people do one, some people do the other. Depends what drives you. So it depends, that I saw something on the internet the other day that they're doing some experimentation using psychedelics and various other things, and I thought, I would love to be part of that group.
Come and join me.
But then
Tom, I like that laugh. Let me just swoop into a couple of statements you write on your site, which was really interesting. I mean, it provoked lots of thoughts in me, apart from all your writings. But I wanted to put two together, which is that the first year expense of moving an expat overseas is $700,000, many of whom fail. And you also say that, well, actually you had three kind of failures. 82% of multinational firms lose money in China, and 70% of international ventures that fail are due to cultural differences. And I feel like at some level, this is the subject we're talking about, which is fitting in or not, standing out or not. Because if you're the same as everybody, then no one's going to buy you. If you stand out too much, people will go after you and try to cut you down.
Yes. I think it's I mean, what we're touching on here is that we've talked about it already, that this needs to belong, and the power of the group, which tends to spit out anybody that doesn't conform to the group's rules, which are largely unwritten, but actually very powerful. And I that's why I see so many. When you look at young men today, the facilities that they used to have in order to belong and also have healthy role models have almost been completely decimated because of political idiocy. And we're getting the results of that. Young men still look for the role models. They still look for groups to belong to, and hence gangs and all the things that come from that, and the moving around of drugs and so on. And this is the societal results of short-term decisions made by politicians who don't have any long-term views.
Well, I'm going to push back just a second. I think it's more of a societal issue, where as a society, whether you can agree or not on governmental policies, but there are certain things that as a society we've been pushing. And I think that's part of the rise of orthodox or extreme religion, where people are seeking boundaries, seeking old-fashioned reactionary types of values in the face of a completely fluid and non-stable type of society where anything goes.
And none of these things are unidimensional.
That's true. Nuance is needed.
And I think that's one of the difficulties we have in the world of social media, where things are either black or white, and people can say whatever they want. It's like the mother, the matriarch is not there to smack Johnny round the ears by saying, "How dare you be so naughty?" You would never say that if it wasn't. You could be anonymous. So it's what we've lost is responsibility. We've lost that sense of responsibility. The needs for I suppose another word is community, isn't it? What we've lost is community.
Yeah.
Because people are held locally responsible for their behavior in communities. And we've lost that, and it's incredibly sad. I don't know if that's sort of answering where you went with what you said.
It's just there's no right or wrong or necessary answer. It just to reflect on. I want to finish with one other area. I mean, you've got lots of really interesting articles that I'm going to point people to read, including How Does Purpose Come Alive in a Company, which is something I'm particularly interested in, and this other topic, which is about feminine energies. So you're very interested in this concept of masculine and feminine energies. I studied women's studies, by the way, at university, Tom. So this is a topic I got fully immersed in. And you see, they wrote on your site, or I think maybe this is on your speaker profile, that you see the feminine as being largely suppressed in both men and women in the Western corporate world, which has led to many of the problems we face today. I'd love for you to elaborate on that.
Well, there's two sides to that. One is defining what I mean by the feminine, I guess, and the other one is the suppression of it. As I think about that, the image I have is Theresa May coming out of 10 Downing Street and resigning, and she cried briefly, and that aroused a number of reactions, one of derision and one of of care. And the derision actually is the dysfunctional masculine, and the care is the functional feminine, in a sense. But what we were seeing was the feminine, which had been completely suppressed in her in the way that she, not just as a PM, but when she was Home Secretary as well, she'd utterly suppressed any feminine. So there was no compassion. There was no creativity. There was no care of people, actually. It was all a horrible masculine that she was espousing. And so I went to I don't know what you call it. It was a symposium or something. The top 100 women in business or something, I think it was called, a couple of years ago. And I was on one of the panels, actually with Sally Penny, who is an amazing barrister, who I interviewed on a podcast for International Women's Day a couple of days ago. And I was saying to her on that podcast that one of the things that really struck me so deeply was that there were all these women there with DBEs and, very pillars of society, but there was virtually no feminine amongst a lot of them. But they had got to where they were, which was very elevated, by expressing masculine traits. And there's no criticism in that. It's because we have an incredibly masculine-oriented and designed environment. And what I really took away from that more than anything else was that the new, as of today, Duke of Edinburgh's wife, Sophie, Prince Edward's wife, gave the keynote speech, and she's the only person all day who mentioned the word love. And it just, actually, I wrote to her secretary, and I think I've got her speech somewhere, because it just so touched me. And some people have said, well, she had the privilege because of her position. But I don't think it's anything to do with that. She was a very successful businesswoman before she married Edward, and has continued a lot of her work. But actually, as we spoke earlier, with humility. She's a really lovely, shining example, in my experience, of the feminine. And one of the things that really surprises me, and I'm sure you may be able to give me examples of where that's different, but what surprises me is that if there are women setting up their own organizations, why are they designing them in the same way as all their male predecessors? Why aren't there women setting up organizations that are oriented around school runs and taking menstruation and menopause and all the things that actually are so rich in our society, but which men don't want anything to do with, and have forced women to largely deny or feel ashamed of? We need new organizations.
I'm tenuously optimistic about the number of changes that are coming around. I see organizations that are really pushing for example, reinstituting come back to the office, which at least is hardship, because people now don't want to come. But if you want that to happen, then you need to rethink who you are and why people are going to get out of bed, get in bloody commuter, sit through traffic, and come to work. You really have to revisit the why, the purpose of coming to work. You've got the 4-day week, and people, of course, promoting greater productivity in that. And then you've got all the different environments, and people are realizing, well, if I'm going to make people come to work, they better have a very different environment. And if you have sufficient empathy within the boardroom, you'll think about flex hours to accommodate dropping off kids or picking them up, and whatever that comes like. In France, it would be, take Wednesday afternoons off, for example, because that's when the schools close. Tom, it's been a fun journey chatting with you. We had in the middle a kerfuffle with electricity and Zoom, but we made it. Tom, how can somebody follow you, hire you? What are the best ways to connect into you, your writing, and your business?
Thank you. Well, my email is Thom, Thom, at serenityin.leadership.com. I'm on LinkedIn as Thom Dennis, ThomDennis. And I'm, Serenity in Leadership has got its own Twitter and Instagram and so on. They're slightly more active than my own. I post a lot of the articles and stuff that I do on LinkedIn, and I'd love people to interact. I'd love people to, I've been talking a lot about men and how men can take responsibility for some of the things that go on in the workplace, particularly around harassment and the unkind way that so many people are being treated. And I'd love to have more interaction around that. Let's talk about it. The trouble is with men don't want to talk about things. They want to do it. They want to do things. So I don't know how that translates, but maybe doing is picking up the phone and phoning me and saying, and my phone's on LinkedIn and the connection things. I'd really like to talk to leaders who want to bring about change and they're not sure how to do it. That's it. And I've just created a retreat, which I'm very excited about, and I'd love people to come and attend that. It's called Leading Through the Void, and there's a website, leadingthroughthevoid.com, which talks all about it, which we've just put up, and that's in September, and it's going to be in Guatemala, and I'd love some really exciting people, particularly mavericks that we've been talking about, to come and explore themselves in an amazing, beautiful place.
Appealing to me, Tom. So you heard it. Please go and visit or email or interact with Tom about bringing about change where you're working. Tom, thanks very much for being on the show.
Minter, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's been great, in spite of all the things that went wrong.
Thanks for having listened to this episode of the Minter Dialogue podcast. If you like the show and would like to support me, please consider a donation on patreon.com/MinterDial. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcast service. And as ever, rating and reviews are the real currency for podcasts. You'll find the show notes with over 2,000 and more blog posts on minterdial.com. Check out my documentary film and 4 books, including my last one, You Lead, How Being Yourself Makes You a Better Leader. And to finish, here's a song I wrote with Stephanie Singer, A Convinced Man.
I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger. To feel free, trust is the reason. Still, I won't toe the line. I sit here passively, hope for your respect, anticipating the thrill of your intellect. Maybe I tell myself there's no use in me lying. I'm a convinced man, building an urge. I'm a convinced man, to live and die submerged. A convinced man, in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, challenge my fate. I'm a convinced man, competition's innate. A convinced of a woman. Despise revenges and struggle with deceit. Live for the challenge so life's not incomplete. What's wrong with challenge? I know soon we all die. I like the feel of a stranger tucked around me, precipitating the danger to feel free. Trust in my reason and let me show you why. I'm a convinced man practicing my lines. I'm a convinced man here in these confines. A convinced man in the arms of a woman. I'm a convinced man, admit to the test. I'm a convinced man, I'm ready for an arrest. I'm a convinced man in the arms of a woman.
You've got questions, we've got answers. Business leadership, ownership, and sales can be challenging. Tune into the Accelerate Your Business Growth podcast to learn from the world's experts. Join me, your host, Diane Helbig, as I chat with people who have expertise in various areas of business. You'll enjoy the lively conversations that are focused on providing you with the ideas, tips, and suggestions you need to realize greater success. Get what you need for your business when you need it from the people who have the answers. Accelerate Your Business Growth is part of the Evergreen Podcast Network and is available on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.